Hello again, everyone. This is Dr. Houck with what I think is going to be maybe the first lecture on Chapter 11, which is, I'm checking the syllabus here, which is Reading 14, the first reading for the new material that'll be covered on the final exam. It's a fairly long chapter, lots of stuff here. I may break the video up into a couple of smaller pieces, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so you know the routine. You certainly need to have your reading in front of you because you'll be blocking out passages as we go. All right, let's take it from the beginning. Sometimes I'll just refer to particular paragraphs, but you should definitely block out anything I suggest or anything I read, or highlight them, however you work with it. First of all, the entire first paragraph is very important as it sets the stage for our discussion. First line, sex can be defined as that quality of humans that's associated with the reproductive organs and is determined by the sex chromosomes they possessed. So females, most females possess two X chromosomes, and most males possess an X sex chromosome and a Y sex chromosome. As you can see, it's noted that while most people can be classified as either 46XX, meaning 46 chromosomes, the two sex chromosomes being both X, either 46XX for females or 46XY for male, there are a number of people that fall outside this strict dichotomy, and we'll discuss that a bit in the next couple of pages. And then about 5 lines down, gender. Gender can be defined as socially and culturally constructed roles that are designed to individuals, that are assigned to individuals based on their sex and or their personal affiliation with sex. I explained that I need to add that because personal affiliation with sex refers to situations in which individuals gender identify in ways that are contrary to their biological sex. And again, we'll be discussing those cases. And gender is even more variable than sex. There are many, many different gender categories, as you'll see. Next paragraph, I talk about the traditional essentialist views of sex and gender. And of course, those are going to be quite different than what you might get in a science class or biology class or anthropology class. Well, because they're usually based on traditional religious ideas or religious scripture, mythology, or something of that sort. Second sentence there, as has been noted many times in this textbook, humans have a tendency to simplify the complex, confusing world we inhabit. But what we gain, however, in regard to order, emotional comfort, and equanimity is lost in regard to our comprehension of the world we live in. So essentially, the traditional essentialist view gives us a fantasy version of reality. At the very bottom, to continue a little bit with this traditional/essentialist view of sex and gender, read with me the ancient writers of Genesis. This is the next paragraph. Were certainly expressing the dominant sentiment of their time when they penned the story of the culturally quintessential man and woman, Eve and Adam. But that template has unfortunately given rise to the sort of muddled essentialist thinking that simplified the human condition to such an extent that we are just now, some 2,500 to 3,000 years later, realizing how inaccurate the neatly dichotomized schemes of sex and gender are. Once again, Genesis is not, and almost certainly was not intended to be, read as a science textbook. It's mythology, not science. Section 2 on biological sex. The third line, the two most statistically prevalent human chromosomal modalities in any society are 46XX and 46XY. There's some interesting information there about embryonic and fetal development that you might find sort of interesting. And then in the next paragraph, I do address the exceptional cases. In other words, people that don't conform strictly to the 46XX and 46XY pattern. You see some examples. Turner syndrome is described as a person who possesses only one X chromosome. And you see there are physiological manifestations attached with that. You also see something called the triple X syndrome there. You also have some males that have an extra X chromosome. There are lots of different conditions. This is just scratching the surface. Bottom paragraph, on the other hand, for a variety of biological and hormonal reasons, some individuals who are 46XX or 46XY, so in other words, we're talking about quote-unquote normal chromosomal females and males, are not masculinized or feminized like most. Males, for example, might incur something known as androgen insensitivity syndrome, in which the embryo is not sufficiently masculinized. And in some cases, as I go on to explain, the CAIS, complete AIS, the individual will appear as a phenotypic female and in fact will gender identify as female. So here's a case where you have a normal chromosomal male who gender identifies as a female because of their phenotypic traits. A similar condition occurs among females. Next paragraph, that's congenital adrenal hyperplasia, CAH. And there, the fetus, in simple terms, is overly masculinized, I guess you can say. And in the most serious cases, as is noted here, the female may be born with a penis. So we can see why gender is such a muddled issue and why the strict two-box scheme given to us in Genesis simply does not describe the real world we live in. Next paragraph, I address individuals born with ambiguous genitalia. We used to use the term hermaphrodite and the adjective hermaphroditic, but that's not really a very good term. It's based on Hermes and Aphrodite, some Greek mythology. Today we just go with the term intersexed, which is a much better term. That's near the bottom of that paragraph. For a long time, the protocol was that they should be surgically corrected, actually, while still an infant. But as you can imagine, so many problems were caused by that attitude that today the safest thing to do is just wait and see and let the individual determine for themselves what they want to do when they are at least young adults. 5 lines from the bottom, I do note this issue is problematic only because many individuals adhere to the traditionally senseless and outmoded notion regarding sex and gender. To continue, a general comment, the last paragraph before section 3, the confusion regarding sex is not unlike the confusion regarding race. In both cases, humans attempt to establish order and create well-defined categories, namely phenotype and sex, where well-defined categories simply, attempt to establish order and create well-defined categories in domains, for example, in phenotype and sex, where well-defined categories simply do not exist. Statistical prevalence should never be the basis of a normative assignment of types to proper categories. That is a very, very important sentiment in cultural anthropology today. So statistical prevalence should never be the basis of a normative assignment. In other words, just because something is statistically prevalent, we shouldn't say that it's normal as meaning just natural, God-given, or whatever terminology you want to use, as if anything else is unnatural or an affront in the eyes of God and so forth. We stay away from those normative types of judgments. And as I note in the next sentence, an intersex individual is no more, no less a human being than other individuals. Okay, Chapter 11, Section 3 is on gender. First couple of sentences, while gender is linked to sex, it's not causally determined solely by biology. For one thing, gender roles, in other words, what it means to be a proper young man or young woman, varies from place to place. So they're not set in stone. They're not absolute. They differ cross-culturally. Not only that, they differ through time in the same cultures. And I mentioned that in the next sentence. Being a proper young man or young woman 100 years ago in the United States is totally different than what that means today. So it's a highly variable, socially constructed notion. The next paragraph, here we address essentialism. The essentialism noted earlier in regard to sex is also very much present in traditional notions regarding gender. Once again, the strictly defined dichotomy of masculine and feminine does not come close to exhausting all of the gender variability that exists. And in fact, the rest of the paragraph, we go through this exercise where I actually count and refer to the different types of individuals that do not fit neatly within the two-box scheme. I note gender atypicality. The terms we use, some derogatory, for today are tomboys for little girls, or maybe sissies for little boys. But they clearly don't fit there. People who desire same-sex sexual activity don't fit neatly in those categories. People who are intersex don't fit neatly in those categories. And it goes on and on and on. As I mentioned about 5 or 6 lines from the bottom, depending on how exclusive we want our categories to be, we could conceivably add more. So how many genders actually exist in our culture? Well, you can keep adding gender descriptions for the exceptions. In other words, people that don't fit in the two boxes. But at what point do you just throw your hands up and say, well, you know what, it kind of doesn't make sense to classify people based on gender anymore? Next section, I discussed third genders. I wanted you to see that around the world, there are many, many different terms used for third genders. In other words, there are some cultures who have recognized the fact that what I call the two-box scheme is invalid, and they've actually created terms for people who don't fit in those boxes. I will mention one, two-spirit. Find that one. It's a couple pages in, two-spirit. Reading the first sentence there, two-spirit is a term that is used, there's a little typo there, I forgot a word, that is used to refer to both third and fourth genders when applied to both males and females in Native American groups. So what are two-spirit? Well, clearly these are people who don't fit squarely in the males who are masculine, females who are feminine two-box scheme. They're described a bit more in the next paragraph. I want you to focus on number 3. It says, and 3, gender variation. Their behavior was gender atypical. So what you have a lot of two-spirit type folks in our culture we might just call transgendered or gender atypical. A couple lines down, these individuals would often but not always cross-dress or dress in a way that positioned them between male and female, and would sometimes but not always engage in same-sex practices. Summary paragraph. Right above the digging deeper,